One of the quietest ways a person loses a life is not through failure, misfortune, or disaster. It happens through performance. It happens when someone slowly forgets how to live from the inside and begins living for the eyes of other people. They begin adjusting their thoughts so they will be accepted, softening their truth so they will not be rejected, reshaping their identity so they will not be left behind. At first, it looks harmless, a little people-pleasing, a little need for reassurance, a little desire to feel admired, chosen, understood, needed. But over time, that desire becomes a cage. It trains the mind to believe that worth must be witnessed before it is real, that joy must be displayed before it counts, that love from the self is not enough unless someone else confirms it. And this is where suffering begins. Not because other people are always cruel, but because the mind that depends on them can never fully rest. It will beg for signals, search for proof, and fear every silence as if silence means emptiness. This audiobook is about leaving that prison. It is about learning how to detach from the endless need to be seen, approved of, and completed by others. It is about discovering the kind of happiness that does not need applause, attention, permission, or an audience. Not a fake independence that pretends to need no one, but a grounded inner fullness that no longer collapses when people leave, withdraw, ignore, misunderstand, or move on. If you have ever felt exhausted by your own attachment, drained by your need to be valued, or frightened by the idea of being alone, then stay here, because what you are looking for is not more attention, it is a stronger center. And once you find it, your mind does not become harder, it becomes clearer. Your heart does not become colder, it becomes freer. Your life does not become smaller, it becomes your own. Written and published by Audiobook Horizon. Chapter 1. The Audience Trap. Most people do not realize how much of their life is organized around an invisible crowd. Even when they are physically alone, that crowd is still present. It lives inside the imagination. It shows up in the question, "What will they think of me?" It enters through hesitation, through over-explanation, through self-censorship, through the endless urge to make choices that look respectable instead of choices that feel true. This audience may be family, old friends, strangers on the internet, former lovers, co-workers, classmates, neighbors, or people who have not mattered in years and still occupy private space in the mind. Their opinions linger long after their actual importance should have ended. The trap is not merely caring what others think. Some level of social awareness is normal. Human beings are relational by nature. The trap begins when the opinions of other people become the main mirror through which you understand yourself. In that condition, you stop asking what is real for you and start asking what is acceptable to them. You stop asking what kind of life fits your spirit and start asking what kind of life will make you look accomplished, lovable, impressive, or justified. You do not merely want connection. You want confirmation. You want proof that you matter because someone noticed. The deeper problem is that an audience is unstable. Crowds are fickle. Approval is temporary. Attention moves quickly. People project their own wounds, preferences, insecurities, and shallow judgments onto others every day. If your inner balance depends on their response, then your mental state will rise and collapse constantly. One kind comment will lift you. One cold reply will wound you. One moment of praise will energize you. One moment of indifference will make you question your worth. This is not living. This is emotional outsourcing. The audience trap also changes behavior in subtle but destructive ways. It makes people perform confidence rather than build it. It makes them post joy instead of feeling it. It makes them chase relationships that look validating instead of relationships that are actually nourishing. It makes them fear solitude because solitude removes witnesses. And when there are no witnesses, they no longer know how to feel substantial. That is why some people panic in silence, not because silence is dangerous, but because silence does not clap. A person trapped in audience thinking becomes highly sensitive to visibility. They want to be chosen publicly, praised openly, desired clearly, and included visibly. Hidden affection feels weak to them. Quiet progress feels meaningless. Private healing feels less exciting than public admiration. They are drawn toward things that produce emotional noise. But noise is not the same as fulfillment. In fact, noise often prevents fulfillment because it keeps the mind overstimulated and dependent on feedback. Think about how many decisions become distorted by this dynamic. Careers are chosen to impress people. Relationships are maintained to avoid seeming unwanted. Opinions are softened to avoid being disliked. Boundaries are abandoned so nobody calls you difficult. Personal style, goals, timing, and even dreams are edited to remain acceptable. Eventually, a strange sorrow begins to form. On the outside, life may look reasonable, but inside, something feels missing. The reason is simple. A life designed for observation cannot nourish the soul of the person living it. When you are trapped by the audience, you become fragmented. One part of you acts, another part of you watches yourself acting, another part anticipates reactions, another part tries to correct the performance in real time. This creates mental fatigue. The mind never fully settles because it is always managing an image. The result is overthinking, insecurity, emotional dependence, and chronic dissatisfaction. Even achievements feel thin because they are consumed by image maintenance. There is always another reaction to manage, another impression to shape, another silence to interpret. To detach from everyone, in the deepest sense, does not mean isolating yourself from humanity. It means breaking the rule that says your emotional reality must pass through public approval before it can feel valid. It means removing other people from the throne where they have been unconsciously judging your existence. It means learning to let your own direct experience count again. This is difficult because many people were trained from childhood to seek life through approval. They were praised when convenient, withheld from when inconvenient, compared, corrected, and conditioned to read the room constantly. They learned that acceptance could be earned, lost, withheld, or bargained with. So they became excellent observers of others and poor witnesses of themselves. Their nervous system learned performance before it learned presence. Their identity formed around adaptation before it formed around self-trust. If that is your history, then your attachment to an audience is not a personal defect. It is a learned survival strategy, but survival strategies that once protected you can later imprison you. What helped you avoid rejection in one chapter of life may now be preventing honesty, intimacy, courage, and inner freedom. The goal is not to hate that old strategy. The goal is to outgrow it. You begin by noticing where the audience still owns you. Notice the conversations you rehearse in your head. Notice the people whose disapproval still affects your appetite, mood, or sleep. Notice how often your imagined image interferes with your actual desires. Notice the moments when you feel the urge to display rather than simply experience. Notice how often you check whether your happiness is visible enough to feel real. These observations matter because the mind cannot release what it refuses to name. The healing begins when you allow a new possibility. What if a meaningful life does not need witnesses? What if some of your best growth will happen in private? What if your most important decisions will confuse people who do not understand your journey? What if being misunderstood is not always a tragedy? What if your life becomes healthier precisely when fewer people approve of it? These are not small questions. They are revolutionary, because when you stop living for an audience, you stop leaking energy into performance. And the energy that returns to you can finally be used to build a life that feels real from the inside. Chapter 2. The hunger to be seen. The desire to be seen is one of the oldest desires in the human heart. It is not inherently unhealthy. To be seen with love, depth, and accuracy is one of the most healing experiences a person can have. The trouble begins when being seen turns from a natural human wish into a desperate emotional need. Then the search changes shape. It is no longer about connection. It becomes a restless hunt for reassurance. You do not simply want companionship. You want someone to remove your doubt about yourself. This hunger often hides behind ordinary behaviors. A person says they only want loyalty, but what they really want is proof that they are not forgettable. Another says they want communication, but what they really want is constant confirmation that they still matter. Someone else says they want romance, but what they truly seek is rescue from their inner emptiness. The surface language sounds reasonable, but beneath it is a frightened mind saying, "Please make me feel real." When the hunger to be seen becomes intense, the mind starts interpreting ordinary events in deeply personal ways. A delayed reply becomes rejection. A cancelled plan becomes evidence of not being important enough. Someone's changing tone becomes a threat. Silence becomes punishment. Distance becomes abandonment. The world is no longer experienced clearly. It is filtered through deprivation. The person is starving for validation, so everything gets translated into the language of personal worth. This hunger can create extraordinary suffering in relationships. Instead of meeting another human being as a whole and separate person, you meet them as a supplier. You become invested not only in who they are, but in what they can regulate inside you. Can they calm your anxiety? Can they reassure your insecurity? Can they confirm your attractiveness, intelligence, value, or lovability? If so, you may become attached very quickly, not because the connection is truly deep, but because the regulation feels addictive. Their attention becomes emotional medicine, and your mind begins fearing any interruption in the supply. The tragedy is that no one can permanently satisfy this hunger for you. Even the most loving partner, devoted friend, or caring family member cannot be present at all times, responsive in all moods, and perfectly attuned to every insecurity you carry. Human beings are limited. They get distracted. They become tired. They focus on their own pain. They pull back. They change. They misunderstand. If your sense of self depends on their unbroken attunement, you will suffer not because they failed to love you, but because you asked them to do a job no human being can do. The hunger to be seen also distorts self-expression. Instead of speaking because something is true, you may speak because you want a reaction. Instead of sharing from abundance, you may share from a craving to be noticed. Instead of resting in your own company, you may turn every experience into a signal. Look at me, remember me, need me, approve of me. Even suffering can become performative when the mind is starving enough. People unconsciously display their wounds to secure attachment. They over-explain pain, dramatize absence, or exaggerate distress in the hope that somebody will finally provide the tenderness they cannot generate within themselves. It is important to understand that shame often sits underneath this hunger. Somewhere inside, many people carry the belief that they are not enough on their own. They fear that if no one is looking, they disappear. If no one desires them, they are ordinary. If no one praises them, they are empty. If no one chooses them, they are unworthy. These beliefs are rarely spoken so directly, but they organize behavior with enormous force. The person becomes dependent on external attention, not because attention is pleasant, but because self-abandonment runs so deep that silence feels unbearable. Healing this hunger does not mean becoming indifferent to connection. It means learning the difference between healthy visibility and emotional dependency. Healthy visibility says, "I enjoy being known, but I still belong to myself when you are absent." Dependency says, "I need your attention to feel stable, and when you pull away, I lose access to my center." That difference determines whether connection nourishes you or consumes you. To heal, you have to ask harder questions than the mind usually prefers. What exactly am I hoping another person will settle inside me? What do I keep asking the world to prove? When I want to be contacted, chosen, admired, or pursued, what feeling am I trying to escape? What story about myself becomes loud when I am not being actively affirmed? These questions can be uncomfortable because they expose the emotional bargains hidden beneath desire. But discomfort is not the enemy. Dishonesty is. If you sit quietly and listen long enough, you may discover that the deepest hunger is not actually to be seen by others. It is to stop being invisible to yourself. That is the turn. So much of our desperation for outside recognition is really compensation for an abandoned relationship within. We lost touch with our own witness. We stopped noticing our needs, honoring our instincts, respecting our limits, and believing our perceptions. Then, because we no longer felt internally accompanied, we searched frantically for someone else to take over the task. You can reverse that pattern. You can become a more faithful witness to your own life. When sadness arises, you can acknowledge it without immediately broadcasting it. When joy appears, you can feel it without needing to display it. When loneliness surfaces, you can meet it with curiosity instead of panic. When desire pulls strongly, you can ask whether it is truly about love or partly about lack. This kind of self-honesty is not glamorous, but it is transformational. As you practice internal witnessing, the hunger slowly changes. It does not disappear overnight, but it softens. You stop interpreting every absence as a verdict. You stop begging subtle attention from people who are emotionally unavailable. You stop making your worth vulnerable to each shift in tone, timing, or availability. You become less reactive because you are less deprived. The mind begins to heal not when everybody finally sees you, but when you stop abandoning yourself in the search, and something unexpected happens. Once your need to be seen becomes less desperate, your relationships become cleaner. You can appreciate attention without being owned by it. You can enjoy closeness without demanding constant proof. You can love someone without asking them to fill the whole architecture of your being. In that state, connection becomes freer because you are no longer trying to turn another person into the missing center of your life. Chapter 3. Why approval never completes you. Approval feels powerful because it temporarily relieves uncertainty. When someone praises you, agrees with you, wants you, or affirms your value, a tension inside the mind relaxes for a moment. It feels like safety. It feels like arrival. But the relief is often brief, and that briefness reveals the central truth. Approval can soothe insecurity, but it cannot cure it. If your internal life is organized around deficiency, then approval will be consumed like water poured onto sand. It lands, it comforts, and then it disappears. Many people spend years trying to complete themselves through the responses of others. They imagine that one perfect relationship, one breakthrough in status, one season of admiration, or one public recognition will finally settle their restlessness. But completion cannot be installed from the outside because incompleteness is not simply a lack of attention. It is a fractured relationship with the self. You can be applauded and still feel hollow, desired and still feel unwanted, included and still feel alone, surrounded and still feel unchosen. External approval often magnifies this paradox because it proves that the problem was deeper than visibility all along. Approval is also unstable because it is tied to conditions. People approve of you for different reasons, and many of those reasons have nothing to do with your deepest truth. Some approve of you when you are easy, some when you are useful, some when you agree with them, some when you stay small enough to be manageable, some when you make them feel superior, some when your success reflects well on them, some when you embody an image they admire. If you build your self-worth from this material, then your worth becomes fragile because the conditions keep shifting. What they loved yesterday, they may resent tomorrow. There is another issue. Approval easily becomes addictive because it creates an emotional high without requiring inner development. Instead of cultivating self-respect, emotional regulation, clarity, discipline, and self-knowledge, you can simply seek another dose of praise. The brain loves shortcuts. Validation is a shortcut. It gives you the sensation of worth without forcing you to build the foundation of worthiness within yourself. But what is borrowed is never secure. The moment the feedback stops, the old insecurity returns, often stronger than before. Consider how this plays out in ordinary life. Someone works tirelessly, not because they love the work, but because achievement gets them admiration. Someone remains attractive at all costs, because desirability is their main currency of self-belief. Someone becomes the helper, rescuer, or wise one, because being needed makes them feel significant. Someone else becomes agreeable, because conflict threatens their access to acceptance. On the surface, these roles can look admirable. Underneath, they may be driven by a fragile contract. I will be this version of myself if it guarantees approval. The pain of this contract appears when life forces change. Beauty changes, roles change, workplaces shift, friend groups dissolve, family members stop depending on you, social circles move on, romantic dynamics transform. The person who built identity on being approved of in a particular role suddenly feels lost. Without the role, who are they? Without the applause, what remains? This question terrifies the approval-dependent mind because it has not learned how to generate stable worth outside feedback loops. Approval also prevents truthful living when it becomes too important. If being liked matters more than being real, you will betray yourself repeatedly. You will say yes when the honest answer is no. You will stay in places that shrink you. You will silence instincts that could protect you. You will tolerate disrespect because rejection feels more threatening than self-betrayal. You will shape your personality according to what gets rewarded. And in time, that pattern creates internal resentment, not only toward others, but toward yourself. Deep down, you know when you are living inauthentically, and the mind cannot fully relax while carrying that knowledge. Completion does not come from being universally approved. It comes from being internally integrated. It comes from knowing what matters to you, living in alignment with it, and remaining loyal to that alignment, even when approval fluctuates. This is not an abstract spiritual slogan. It is a practical psychological reality. The more divided you are within yourself, the more approval will matter. The more unified you become, the less control approval has over your nervous system. Self-completion begins with a shift in authority. Instead of letting external response define your inner state, you begin evaluating yourself by deeper standards. Did I act with integrity? Did I honor my boundaries? Did I tell myself the truth? Did I abandon myself to avoid discomfort? Did I pursue what matters, even imperfectly? Did I remain respectful without becoming submissive? These questions build a different architecture of worth. They root you in behavior and character rather than public reaction. It is also necessary to grieve the fantasy of final approval. Many people secretly long for an ultimate emotional moment where everyone who doubted them sees their value, everyone who overlooked them regrets it, and everyone whose attention they craved finally offers recognition. It is a seductive fantasy because it promises revenge and completion at once. But even if such a moment arrived, it would not heal what is actually wounded. You would still have to live inside yourself the next day. The mature path is quieter. It asks you to stop trying to win the emotional courtroom of public opinion. It asks you to become less interested in being universally understood and more interested in living in a way you can respect. It asks you to trust that not everyone will approve of your healing, your boundaries, your distance, your honesty, or your priorities. Some people benefited from your insecurity. Some were comfortable only when you sought their validation. Your growth may unsettle them. Let it. When you stop expecting approval to complete you, something very clean happens inside. You become more selective about whose voice matters. You become slower to panic when misunderstood. You become less willing to chase reassurance from unavailable people. You begin noticing that your mind feels stronger when it is not constantly negotiating for permission to exist as it is. Approval is pleasant. It can be warm, encouraging, and useful. But it is not a home. If you try to live inside it, you will remain a tenant in other people's perceptions. The task is to build your home elsewhere. Build it in self-respect. Build it in clarity. Build it in truthfulness. Build it in a life whose meaning does not disappear when the room gets quiet. Chapter 4. The cost of performing for people. Performance is exhausting because it splits energy in two directions at once. One direction goes toward living, the other goes toward managing how that life appears. This divided state drains the mind, weakens intuition, and breeds chronic tension. You may still function. You may even function well. But beneath the surface there is strain. The strain comes from constantly asking, how am I being received? How do I sound? Do I seem enough? Did that make me look weak? Was I interesting enough? Attractive enough? Successful enough? Detached enough? Happy enough? Performance turns ordinary existence into a stage, and a stage is no place to rest. The cost appears first in the body. A performing person is often hypervigilant. They monitor expression, tone, timing, and response. They rehearse conversations before they happen and replay them after they end. They become highly attuned to social temperature. Their nervous system remains on alert because acceptance feels conditional. This can create fatigue that is hard to explain. Outwardly, nothing dramatic happened. Inwardly, the body spent the whole day negotiating survival through image management. Performance also corrodes relationships. When you are presenting yourself rather than inhabiting yourself, intimacy becomes difficult. Even if people like you, they may not actually know you. They know the agreeable version, the attractive version, the competent version, the spiritual version, the funny version, the unbothered version, the endlessly understanding version. But if you are afraid that honesty will cost you attachment, then parts of the real self remain hidden. Over time, this creates loneliness inside connection. You are with people, but not fully met, because full meeting requires full presence. Another cost is confusion. The more you perform, the harder it becomes to tell what you genuinely want. Do you want this career, or do you want the status it gives? Do you want this relationship, or do you want the feeling of being chosen? Do you want this lifestyle, or do you want the image associated with it? Do you actually enjoy this social environment, or have you simply learned that it keeps you visible? Performance teaches the self to use public response as a compass. But public response is a terrible compass for private meaning. There is also moral cost. Many people imagine performance as a harmless social strategy, but repeated self-distortion has consequences. Every time you deny your instincts to preserve approval, you teach yourself that your truth is secondary. Every time you smile when something violates you, you weaken self-trust. Every time you overextend to avoid disappointing someone, you communicate inwardly that your own limits are negotiable. Eventually, self-betrayal becomes normalized. You may not call it that. You may call it being nice, mature, diplomatic, low maintenance, or understanding. But if the pattern consistently requires erasing yourself, then the price is too high. Performance also invites manipulation. People who need external approval can often be controlled through praise, attention, guilt, or withdrawal. They become responsive to small shifts in how others treat them because those shifts carry emotional weight. A manipulative person does not have to dominate openly. They simply learn what your nervous system depends on. If you need to feel admired, they will flatter you. If you fear disapproval, they will imply disappointment. If you fear abandonment, they will pull away strategically. Performance creates these vulnerabilities because your center is located outside your own authority. The most painful cost may be emptiness after success. A performing person sometimes gets exactly what they thought they wanted. The praise comes, the followers arrive, the relationship begins, the attention increases, the image improves, and yet the emotional hunger remains. Sometimes it even intensifies, because now there is more to maintain, more eyes, more expectations, more fear of losing status, more pressure to keep the performance convincing. This is why some highly admired people are internally miserable. Their external rewards multiplied, but the structure beneath those rewards was still dependency. A quieter life can feel unfamiliar to someone who has performed for years. Privacy feels underwhelming. Simplicity feels invisible. Real healing feels slow because it produces less social excitement than public display. But the quiet life has a gift the performing life cannot offer. It gives you access to direct experience. You begin doing things because they matter to you, not because they create an impression. You rest without announcing it. You learn without displaying it. You recover without dramatizing it. You make decisions without needing everybody to understand them. This is where dignity returns. To stop performing, you do not need to become blunt, cold, or antisocial. You simply need to reduce the gap between what is true and what is presented. If you are tired, acknowledge tiredness to yourself instead of disguising it as ease. If something hurts, admit that privately before trying to appear unaffected. If you want distance, let yourself want distance instead of forcing contact out of guilt. If something matters, let it matter without converting it into a performance for approval. The point is not to expose everything to everyone. The point is to stop lying inwardly. One useful question is this: if nobody could see this choice, would I still want it? That question can cut through layers of confusion. If nobody would applaud the relationship, would you still stay? If nobody would be impressed by the job, would you still pursue it? If nobody could admire your generosity, would you still give? If nobody knew you were healing, would you still do the work? Honest answers reveal where performance still has power. As the need to perform loosens, your life may become less dramatic and more substantial. Fewer emotional highs, fewer social theatrics, fewer restless comparisons, but also less anxiety, less craving, less interpretation, less dependency. You stop shaping existence into a product and start inhabiting it as a life. That shift may not be glamorous, but it is profoundly healing. Chapter 5. A solitude is where you return. For many people, solitude is not simply the absence of company. It is the place where unresolved material rises. Without conversation, noise, romance, or distraction, the buried parts become audible. Regret speaks. Longing speaks, fear speaks, shame speaks. The mind starts producing questions that social life helps postpone. Am I living truthfully? Why do I keep chasing people who drain me? What am I avoiding? Why am I so restless? Why do I need so much reassurance? Because these questions can feel uncomfortable. Some people label solitude as the problem, but solitude is not creating the discomfort. It is revealing what was already there. This is why learning to be alone is one of the great thresholds of maturity. If you cannot be with yourself without collapsing into panic, compulsive distraction, or desperate attachment, then your inner life is not yet a place of companionship. It is a place of exile. And when the self feels like exile, the world becomes a desperate search for escape. You reach for people, entertainment, stimulation, romance, drama, ambition, or busyness, not only because they are enjoyable, but because they protect you from direct contact with your own interior. The problem is that avoidance keeps suffering frozen. The pain remains, the loneliness remains, the dependency remains, and the mind never learns that it can survive its own depth. Solitude, when entered consciously, becomes the opposite of abandonment. It becomes reunion. It is where you hear your own thoughts clearly enough to challenge them. It is where your emotional patterns become visible. It is where you learn what your nervous system does when no one is there to regulate it for you. It is where you discover whether your happiness has any roots beyond stimulation. At first, this return can feel awkward. You may notice how quickly the mind reaches outward. It wants to message someone, check who noticed you, revisit old memories, fantasize about being desired. scroll through the lives of others, or mentally argue with people who are not present. This outward pull reveals dependence. The mind has been conditioned to seek itself externally, so when you bring it back inward, it protests. That protest does not mean solitude is wrong. It means a long-neglected relationship is being restored. Solitude is where self-observation deepens. You begin noticing the thoughts that run repeatedly beneath your social behavior. Maybe you discover that much of your friendliness comes from fear of disapproval. Maybe you see how quickly you turn ordinary silence into stories of rejection. Maybe you realize that your strongest attraction is often triggered not by compatibility, but by emotional unpredictability. Maybe you see that you only feel motivated when somebody is watching. These insights are not punishments. They are freedom becoming possible. There is also a tenderness in solitude that many people miss. When you stop using aloneness as evidence of failure, it becomes space. In that space, you can read without performing intelligence. You can work without comparison. You can create without worrying how it appears. You can cry without explaining. You can rest without earning it. You can walk, cook, clean, think, pray, journal, breathe, or simply sit. These ordinary moments may not look important from the outside, but they rebuild a broken foundation. They teach the mind that existence does not need constant applause to feel legitimate. Solitude also restores discernment. In noisy emotional environments, it is hard to tell what you actually feel. You absorb other people's energy, expectations, moods, and desires. You become reactive. But alone, the water clears. You can ask simpler questions. Do I miss this person, or do I miss being wanted? Do I want to go back, or do I want relief from discomfort? Am I lonely, or am I bored? Do I feel love here, or merely relief from emptiness? Solitude creates the silence necessary for honest distinctions. Many people fear that if they detach too much, life will become emotionally flat. In reality, conscious solitude does not flatten life. It refines it. You become less drawn to emotional chaos and more responsive to what is steady. You become less interested in chasing intensity and more interested in what is true. You still appreciate companionship, affection, and shared joy, but you no longer confuse them with salvation. Your happiness starts to come from inhabiting your own life more fully, rather than escaping it. There is an essential discipline in solitude. You have to stop treating every uncomfortable feeling as an emergency. Loneliness may arise. Let it speak without making it your identity. Sadness may surface. Let it move without turning it into a crisis. Boredom may come. Stay long enough to discover what lies beneath it. Often beneath boredom is withdrawal from overstimulation. Beneath loneliness is grief. Beneath grief is longing. Beneath longing is the need to feel connected to yourself again. If you interrupt every stage too quickly, you never arrive at the lesson hidden below the noise. To return to yourself in solitude is not to become closed off from life. It is to become rooted before re-entering it. The rooted person can love without clinging, participate without performing, and connect without dissolving. They do not need every room to approve of them, because they are no longer estranged from their own presence. They can enjoy company deeply, because company is no longer being used as anesthesia. When you learn this, being alone stops feeling like a sentence. It becomes a sanctuary of clarity. You do not need to glorify isolation. You do not need to pretend never to miss people. You simply stop treating solitude as proof that something is wrong with you. Instead, you recognize it as one of the places where the mind can recover from noise and the self can hear its own voice again. Chapter 6. Detachment is not coldness. One reason many people resist detachment is that they confuse it with emotional numbness. They imagine that to detach means to stop caring, stop loving, stop feeling, or stop participating. They picture a withdrawn person who has built walls so thick that nothing can enter. But this is not healthy detachment. That is often fear disguised as strength. Real detachment is not the absence of feeling, it is the absence of captivity. When you are attached in an unhealthy way, your emotional state becomes chained to outcomes you cannot fully control. You need someone to stay, respond, agree, admire, choose, reassure, or behave in a certain way in order to feel stable. Your mind becomes over-invested. It does not simply prefer an outcome, it collapses without it. That is what creates suffering. Detachment interrupts this collapse by allowing space between your inner life and external conditions. You can care deeply while still accepting that other people are separate beings with their own timing, limitations, preferences, and decisions. Coldness avoids vulnerability. Detachment allows vulnerability without losing yourself inside it. Coldness refuses to care because caring seems risky. Detachment cares honestly, but refuses to make control its method of safety. Coldness says, "I will not need anyone." Detachment says, "I may need connection, but I will not build my identity on dependency." Coldness cuts off feeling. Detachment lets feeling move, without turning it into possession. This distinction matters in love. An attached person often mistakes intensity for closeness. They believe that constant contact, emotional urgency, and fear of loss are proof of depth. But these states may simply indicate dysregulation. A detached person can love fully and still remain clear. They do not need to monitor every shift in tone. They do not use guilt to secure attention. They do not interpret another person's independence as betrayal. They allow space because they know love suffocates when it becomes a surveillance system. Detachment also protects dignity. Without it, people often beg for what should be given freely. They over-explain their worth to those committed to misunderstanding them. They chase closure from people who have already shown indifference. They cling to one-sided relationships because letting go feels like admitting defeat. But detachment restores proportion. It helps you say, "I can feel sorrow and still release this. I can value what we had and still accept that it is over. I can care about you and still walk away from what harms me." These are not cold statements, they are mature ones. Another misconception is that detachment makes life less passionate. In truth, it often makes passion cleaner. When you are less possessed by need, your choices reveal more sincerity. You spend time with people because you genuinely enjoy them, not because you cannot tolerate your own company. You pursue goals because they matter to you, not because achievement is the only way to silence inadequacy. You give affection because it is real, not because you are bargaining for reassurance. Detachment removes the sticky desperation that so often contaminates desire. Detachment also requires grief. This part is unavoidable. To detach from unhealthy dependency, you must let go of fantasies. You must let go of the fantasy that one person will fix your emptiness, that the people who overlooked you will one day provide the exact recognition you wanted, that endless explanation will finally make the wrong person understand that enough effort can force reciprocity where it does not naturally exist. Letting go of fantasy hurts, because fantasy once protected hope, but false hope is expensive. It keeps you emotionally tied to what cannot nourish you. Healthy detachment says yes to reality. If someone is inconsistent, it sees inconsistency. If they are kind, it enjoys kindness. If they leave, it acknowledges loss. If they stay, it appreciates presence. It does not need to distort facts to maintain emotional security. This is why detachment strengthens the mind. It reduces denial. And a mind that sees clearly suffers less from self-created confusion. It is possible to become detached and still warm, generous, and relational. In fact, the healthiest people often appear both open-hearted and self-contained. They can listen without absorbing everything. They can love without chasing. They can help without rescuing. They can miss someone without abandoning themselves. They can enjoy praise without depending on it. They can experience disappointment without turning it into proof of unworthiness. This is freedom in practice. To cultivate detachment, begin where you usually fuse. Notice the people or outcomes that hijack your inner stability. Notice where you overinvest before reciprocity exists. Notice where imagination runs ahead of reality. Notice how quickly you personalize other people's limitations. Then create a small pause. In that pause, remind yourself that preference is not possession. Desire is not destiny. Care is not control. Loss is painful, but it is survivable. These reminders may sound simple, yet repeated simplicity is how the nervous system learns a new pattern. Detachment is not withdrawal from life. It is the way you stop handing your mind over to conditions you cannot command. It is the disciplined art of remaining connected without being consumed. And once you begin to understand it this way, detachment stops sounding harsh. It starts sounding merciful. Chapter 7. Stop chasing the unavailable. One of the most damaging habits of the approval-hungry mind is chasing what does not truly meet it. Sometimes this chase is obvious. Someone ignores you, and you pursue harder. A relationship becomes inconsistent, and you try to fix it with more effort. Affection is unclear, and you respond by becoming more accommodating, more helpful, more attractive, more understanding, more patient, more useful. Other times the chase is quieter. You keep revisiting old dynamics in your mind. You keep hoping a person who gave little will suddenly give deeply. You keep translating crumbs into evidence of hidden potential. The form changes, but the structure remains. You are trying to get nourishment from a source that keeps showing you its limits. The painful question is why? Why do people chase the unavailable so intensely? Part of the answer is psychological conditioning. If love was inconsistent early in life, inconsistency may feel emotionally familiar. The nervous system does not always seek what is healthy. It often seeks what is recognizable. Unavailability can feel magnetic, not because it is good, but because it activates old emotional scripts. The person who gives little and withholds unpredictably may trigger the same longing you once felt toward distant authority figures, inconsistent caregivers, or emotionally confusing environments. Another part of the answer is ego. Chasing the unavailable can become a mission of self-redemption. If you can get this person to choose you, understand you, or return your energy, it feels as though old wounds will be repaired. Their love becomes symbolic. It is no longer about them alone. It is about finally winning where you once felt denied. That is why the chase can become obsessive. You are not merely attached to the person. You are attached to what their response seems to promise about your worth. But unavailable people, whether intentionally or not, keep you living in anticipation rather than reality. You become preoccupied with possibility. You analyze signals, interpret mixed messages, excuse inconsistency, and wait for the connection to become what you imagine it could be. In the process, you neglect what is directly observable. They are not showing up fully. They are not matching your effort. They are not making your heart calmer. They are not providing clarity. They are producing confusion, and confusion is information. Chasing the unavailable damages self-respect because it trains you to override evidence. You tell yourself to be patient when what you need is honesty. You call emotional starvation a test of devotion. You label your anxiety as love. You settle for glimpses because you fear the emptiness that may follow letting go. But every time you keep pleading with what is unwilling or incapable, you teach your mind that your needs can be postponed indefinitely for the sake of attachment. There is also a hidden cost to chasing what is unavailable. It keeps you unavailable to yourself. Your attention, imagination, and emotional energy become occupied by another person's uncertainty. You spend hours thinking about what they meant, how to respond, what to do next, whether to hold on, whether they care, whether they will return. That energy could have gone toward building your life, strengthening your mind, deepening your work, restoring your body, or learning your own patterns. Instead, it leaks into obsession. To stop chasing, you must accept a hard principle. Potential is not the same as reality. A person may have depth, tenderness, attraction, chemistry, history, and moments of sincerity, but if the consistent reality is lack, then lack is the truth you must relate to. Emotional maturity means relating to what is, not to what occasionally flashes through the cracks. Stopping the chase does not mean you never desire. It means you stop negotiating with absence. You stop trying to convince someone to meet you where they repeatedly choose not to stand. You stop interpreting your persistence as loyalty when it is really fear. You stop making self-abandonment look noble. If a relationship requires you to constantly audition for care, then it is not love that is growing there. It is dependency. Often the grief of letting go is less about losing the person and more about losing the fantasy. You grieve the imagined future, the hoped-for turnaround, the redemption story, the version of yourself who would finally feel chosen if they chose you back. Let yourself grieve that honestly, but do not let grief become an excuse to continue kneeling before what cannot feed you. A healthy mind learns to ask different questions. Instead of asking, "How can I make them value me?" ask, "Why am I trying to secure value from someone who does not know how to offer it?" Instead of asking, "What if they change?" ask, "What is this dynamic teaching me about my current level of self-respect?" Instead of asking, "How do I keep them interested?" ask, "Why do I feel so interested in what destabilizes me?" These questions return authority to you. You may notice that when you stop chasing, withdrawal symptoms appear. The mind misses the stimulation, the hope, the anticipation, the emotional spikes. Let it miss them. Not every craving deserves obedience. Sometimes the system is simply detoxing from unpredictability. Stay steady. Breathe through the silence. Let the body learn that uncertainty will not kill you. When the chase ends, you begin recovering energy that was tied up in waiting. You sleep better. You think more clearly. You stop checking for signs. You become available for reciprocal connection. Most importantly, you stop proving to yourself that your love must be earned through endurance. Some people are not meant to be convinced. They are meant to be released. Chapter 8. Rebuild a life that feels like yours. Letting go creates space, but space alone is not enough. If you detach from unhealthy relationships, approval-seeking, and emotional performance without building something sturdier in their place, the old patterns will return. The mind will crave familiar intensity. It will want to fill the emptiness quickly. That is why detachment must be paired with construction. You are not only freeing yourself from what distorts you, you are rebuilding a life that belongs to you. This rebuilding begins with attention. For too long, your attention may have been scattered across the reactions of others, who responded, who cared, who noticed, who left, who might come back, who is thinking what. Now attention must be redirected toward the substance of your own life. What does your body need? What does your work require? What routines strengthen you? What environments drain you? What kind of rhythm helps your mind stay clear? What neglected abilities, interests, or commitments are waiting for your return? These questions sound ordinary, but ordinary questions build durable lives. A life that feels like yours is not built from image, it is built from congruence. That means the outer structure begins to match inner truth more closely. If you need less noise, you create less noise. If certain relationships consistently fracture your calm, you limit access. If your schedule leaves no room for reflection, you change it. If you have been tolerating habits that weaken your mind, you replace them. Rebuilding is not dramatic in the way performance is dramatic. It is repetitive, practical, sometimes unglamorous. But it creates the conditions under which genuine happiness can grow. Many people delay this work because they are waiting to feel inspired, confident, or fully healed first. That is backward. Structure often produces the stability that inspiration cannot. You do not need to feel complete before you begin creating a better life. You need to begin. Order the room. Walk regularly. Sleep consistently. Read what sharpens you. Reduce what scatters you. Earn your own respect through small forms of discipline. The point is not perfection. The point is to stop living as if your well-being is a secondary concern. Rebuilding also includes reclaiming private joy. When a person has lived for an audience, joy becomes entangled with visibility. They forget how to enjoy things quietly. They lose interest in experiences that do not generate recognition. This must be reversed. Learn again how to enjoy a meal without documenting it, a walk without reporting it, a project without announcing it, a breakthrough without displaying it, a rest day without justifying it. Private joy is one of the strongest signs that the mind is healing. It means your experience is becoming enough for you again. A life that feels like yours also requires cleaner standards in relationships. Detachment is not only about leaving the wrong people, it is about changing the terms on which you relate. You stop rewarding inconsistency with access. You stop over-investing before trust is earned. You stop treating chemistry as character. You stop making excuses for patterns that keep hurting you. You stop staying available to dynamics that repeatedly cost you self-respect. This may reduce the number of people around you for a while, but that reduction is not necessarily loss. Sometimes it is filtration. Another important part of rebuilding is language. The way you speak to yourself matters. If your inner voice is still harsh, needy, desperate, or humiliating, then detachment on the outside will be incomplete. You need an inner language that is firm but not cruel, honest but not hopeless, protective but not paranoid. Instead of saying, "Nobody wants me," you might say, "I feel unseen right now," but that feeling is not the whole truth. Instead of saying, "I need them," you might say, "I am attached, and I can survive the loosening of this bond." Instead of saying, "I am nothing without approval," you might say, "I am learning how to value what cannot be measured by reaction." Rebuilding a life that feels like yours means recovering authorship. For a long time, other people's moods, preferences, expectations, and opinions may have been writing your script. Now you take the pen back. This does not mean becoming rigidly self-focused. It means allowing your choices to be shaped by reality and principle, rather than by the fear of not being liked. It means asking, what kind of person am I becoming through this habit, this relationship, this environment, this daily routine? It means understanding that identity is not merely discovered, it is also practiced. There will be periods of emptiness during this reconstruction. When old stimulation fades and new rootedness is still developing, life may feel quieter than you are used to. Do not misread this as failure. A garden does not look impressive the day after it is cleared, but clearing matters. You are removing what could never truly sustain you so that something healthier has room to grow. As your life becomes more your own, you may notice a decrease in emotional chaos and an increase in steadiness. Steadiness can initially feel unfamiliar, even boring, to a mind trained on intensity. Stay with it. Underneath that apparent boredom is often relief. Underneath relief is capacity. Underneath capacity is creativity, concentration, and self-respect returning to places they had long been missing. A life that feels like yours is not one that everyone understands. It may look simpler, slower, less publicly impressive, but if it fits your mind better, if it honors your values more honestly, if it allows you to breathe without constantly negotiating your image, then it is richer than the most admired life built on self-abandonment. You are not here to become pleasing to every observer. You are here to inhabit your own existence with enough integrity that happiness no longer requires a crowd to confirm it. Chapter 9. The Discipline of Emotional Independence. Emotional independence is often misunderstood as a personality trait. People speak about it as though some individuals are simply born self-contained, while others are doomed to need more than they should. In reality, emotional independence is largely a discipline. It is practiced, strengthened, tested, and refined. It is not the absence of attachment. It is the ability to remain inwardly responsible even while attachments exist. Nuff the Verdspringam. Emotional independence is learning to regulate without immediate rescue. When discomfort rises, the dependent mind searches outward fast. It wants a message, a distraction, a promise, a reaction, a person who can make the feeling stop. Emotional independence slows this impulse. It says, stay with the feeling long enough to understand it before outsourcing it. This is not punishment, it is skill building. If you never sit with your own nervous system, you never learn what it is capable of surviving. Regulation may be simple: breathing more slowly, naming the emotion accurately, drinking water, walking, writing down what the mind is predicting, returning to the body when imagination starts racing, waiting before sending the message driven by panic, allowing a wave of loneliness to pass before turning it into a dramatic story about your life. These practices are basic, but basics repeated with patience become power. The second discipline is refusal to romanticize destabilization. Many people secretly equate emotional turbulence with depth. If someone makes them anxious, uncertain, obsessive, or euphoric, they assume the connection must be meaningful. But nervous system agitation is not proof of destiny. It may simply be activation. Emotional independence means respecting steadiness enough to stop glamorizing what derails you. The third discipline is boundary maintenance. An emotionally independent person does not rely on others to guess their limits. They take responsibility for protecting their time, attention, and energy. They know that access is not owed simply because someone desires it. They recognize that overexposure to draining people can undo hard-won clarity. So they learn to say no, delay, pause, step back, or disengage without writing an essay of justification every time. This does not make them selfish. It makes them protective of what keeps them internally clear. The fourth discipline is accurate interpretation. Emotional dependence often goes hand in hand with distorted meaning-making. A short reply becomes rejection. A disagreement becomes a threat. Someone else's mood becomes your responsibility. Emotional independence challenges these interpretations. It asks, what are the facts, and what is the story I am adding? This practice prevents the mind from spiraling around assumptions that are emotionally intense but not necessarily true. The fifth discipline is earning self-trust. You cannot be emotionally independent if you keep abandoning yourself. Every time you ignore your own red flags, tolerate clear disrespect, return to what repeatedly harms you, or betray your stated values for temporary comfort, self-trust weakens. Emotional independence grows when you prove to yourself, through action, that you are willing to protect your own well-being. This proof is cumulative. It is built one decision at a time. The sixth discipline is delayed gratification in connection. The dependent mind wants immediate fusion. It wants quick certainty, quick closeness, quick emotional merging. But independence knows that healthy intimacy develops through observation, reciprocity, and time. It does not rush into over-attachment because it is hungry. It allows people to reveal who they are gradually. This saves enormous suffering. The seventh discipline is private affirmation. If you only feel strong when others tell you that you are strong, then your strength is rented. Emotional independence requires an inner vocabulary of recognition. You need to be able to say, that was hard, and I handled it. I wanted to reach back, and I did not. I felt lonely, and I stayed honest. I am disappointed, but I am not destroyed. I am grieving, but I am still standing. These acknowledgements are not ego inflation. They are acts of witness. They remind the mind that it is not invisible when no one else is commenting. The eighth discipline is selective vulnerability. Some people overexpose themselves because they hope honesty will secure closeness. Others underexpose because they fear being hurt. Emotional independence chooses carefully. It shares where there is safety, reciprocity, and enough evidence of care. It does not spill private pain into unworthy hands just to feel briefly held. This selectivity protects dignity and reduces the chance of using vulnerability as a shortcut to attachment. The ninth discipline is staying rooted in purpose. A life with no deeper direction will often become over-invested in relational drama because drama fills emptiness. Emotional independence grows when your days are linked to meaningful work, learning, service, creation, responsibility, or devotion. Purpose does not eliminate emotional need, but it gives the psyche structure. It prevents relationships from becoming the sole source of intensity and meaning. The final discipline is tolerance for reality. Not everyone will stay. Not every bond will deepen. Not every explanation will be received. Not every silence will be answered. Not every effort will be reciprocated. Emotional independence does not deny these facts. It learns to remain intact in the presence of them. This is not a hardening of the heart. It is the strengthening of the center. Practice these disciplines long enough, and the mind changes. It becomes less impulsive, less hungry, less captivated by inconsistency. You stop throwing your entire emotional weight against every door that opens slightly. You become more deliberate, more discerning, more grounded. And in that groundedness, happiness stops feeling like something fragile that other people can grant or withdraw. It begins to feel like something built from the inside through repeated loyalty to your own well-being. Chapter 10. Happiness needs no audience. There is a form of happiness that is loud, performative, and easily noticed. It likes display. It likes witnesses. It often depends on momentum, admiration, novelty, and response. There is nothing inherently wrong with this kind of happiness, but it is unstable, because what creates it can just as quickly interrupt it. If your joy relies on being seen, then invisibility will hurt you. If it relies on being envied, then ordinary life will disappoint you. If it relies on being chosen, then another person's shifting desire will shake you. The deeper happiness this book points toward is different. It is quieter. It does not need to prove itself. It may not always look impressive from the outside. It can exist in a simple room, a disciplined morning, a clear mind, a clean conscience, an honest boundary, a solitary walk, a finished page, a nourished body, a calm nervous system, a prayerful moment, a released attachment, a truthful decision, or a peaceful evening spent without performance. This happiness does not depend on applause because it is rooted in congruence. When happiness needs an audience, your experience is never enough by itself. You are always leaning outward. Even in moments of beauty, a part of your mind is thinking about how the moment appears, how it would be interpreted, who would admire it, who should know, who would regret losing access to you, who might finally understand your value. This outward leaning fractures direct experience. Instead of fully living the moment, you partially convert it into a signal. That conversion is subtle but costly. A mind that no longer needs an audience begins to enjoy reality more intimately. Meals taste more vivid when they are not part of a performance. Conversations become more sincere when they are not being internally evaluated for image. Work becomes more meaningful when it is not merely a stage for worthiness. Rest becomes more restorative when it is not accompanied by guilt about visibility. Happiness becomes less theatrical and more inhabitable. This shift also changes your relationship with loss. If someone leaves, the old mind asks, "What does this say about me?" The new mind asks, "What is true now, and how do I meet it with dignity?" If approval fades, the old mind asks, "How do I get it back?" The new mind asks, "Why was I handing so much authority to that response?" If life becomes quiet, the old mind feels forgotten. The new mind asks, what becomes possible in this quiet, that noise kept interrupting? Happiness with no audience is deeply connected to sufficiency, not the fantasy that you will never desire more, but the capacity to experience enoughness in the present, enoughness in your own company, enoughness in a slower season, enoughness in work done sincerely, enoughness in a few honest relationships rather than many shallow mirrors, enoughness in a day that does not impress anyone but still aligns with what matters. This enoughness protects the mind from endless hunger. Many people fear that if they stop reaching outward for validation, they will lose ambition, charm, romance, or joy. Usually the opposite happens. What falls away is not aliveness. What falls away is desperation. You become more alive because your energy is no longer tied up in image maintenance. You become more attractive because you are less grasping. You become more loving because you are less controlling. You become more creative because you are less concerned with reception. You become more stable because your center is no longer rented out to public opinion. This kind of happiness also invites humility. You realize that some of the most important things in life cannot be displayed meaningfully. Maturity does not photograph well. Integrity is not always dramatic. Inner freedom often looks ordinary. Genuine healing may be invisible for long stretches. The strongest boundary may happen in silence. The most profound release may take place in a private decision nobody applauds. Yet these unseen shifts are often more valuable than any visible triumph. To say that happiness needs no audience is not to reject community. We still need companionship, love, and meaningful exchange. But these things become gifts rather than requirements for identity. You enjoy them without handing them the right to define your worth. You appreciate being understood without making misunderstanding catastrophic. You value recognition without begging for it. You let affection enrich life without allowing its fluctuation to rewrite your relationship with yourself. By now, perhaps you can feel the deeper message. Detaching from everyone does not mean becoming disconnected from humanity. It means releasing the compulsive belief that your mind must be completed, validated, and stabilized by other people's reactions. It means recovering the ability to sit in your own existence and find that it is real, substantial, and worthy even when no one is watching. That recovery is not small. It is a return to the center from which a whole life can be lived. So let your joy become quieter if it needs to. Let your circle become smaller if it becomes truer. Let your life stop performing. Let your decisions disappoint the wrong audience. Let your mind stop kneeling before every shift in attention. Let your worth become less negotiable. Let your happiness become private enough to deepen. Because the moment your inner life no longer needs a crowd to confirm it, you begin to discover the one thing performance never gave you, a life that feels like it belongs to you.